All right, well, I think we'll get started. Today is class 3. I can't believe it. We're 3/4 of the way finished the class already. It's hard to believe. And today we're going to talk about ADHD at home. And this class, particularly more than any of the other classes, really requires and benefits from your input. So I'm going to ask you to write your questions, to write your comments, so that we can have a conversation and I can really assist you in what your primary struggles are with at home. So how do we stop arguing and improve cooperation? What types of plans and routines foster executive functioning skills with kids with ADHD? And what will help them the most? Why don't punishments work? And what can you do instead to motivate your son or daughter? So we're going to just review for a second the 5 C's and how to putting them into action at home. Number 1, self-control. You're going to notice if you're feeling disturbed and identify what sets you off, but also what sets them off, so that you can have a plan in place for when these repeated behaviors occur, rather than negotiating each one of them every time they show up. You're going to pick one behavior that you would like your child to change, and you're going to discuss current challenges that you're sharing with your child and make a list. So they're going to come up with some of their challenges, you're going to come up with some of yours. And one of the fun and easy ways to do that is I encourage parents to sit down with their kids and say, let's say I could grant you 3 wishes about your life or our family. An extra wish is not one of the options. What are 3 things that you would like to see different about your life or our family? And everyone could go around in the family and answer that question. And I wonder, but most of the time there's some overlap between what you would like to see be different in the family and what they would like to see be different in the family. And that gives you a starting block, so to speak. So you can really start together on something that's bothering everybody. And that way your child will have more buy-in and feel, that you're actually understanding and listening, meeting them where they are, compassion. The third thing we're going to do is collaborate by making a plan together, by having these kinds of conversations towards improving that one issue. Rather than you telling them how they could do it, you listen to some of their ideas and you incorporate a piece of them, not necessarily all of them, but some of them, so they feel heard and they feel included. And you're going to use incentives that matter to them, and you're going to have to change them because kids with ADHD get bored. You're going to support their efforts, you're going to redirect them when necessary, and you're going to refer back to your mutually agreed upon plan, which has a default setting. So this is what happens when we follow a plan. This is what happens when you don't want to follow the plan. And you're going to keep the scaffolding in place, these support systems, longer than you think. That is consistency. And lastly, celebration. We're going to notice any accomplishments, validate, acknowledge towards achieving goals, even if they're not fully completed. And at each weekly family meeting, which is what I'm going to recommend here, you reassess how things are going, what you could tweak, what could go better. And this allows your kids to feel like they're actually really in this process with you. And it gives them autonomy. Kids want to be independent. They want to feel like they're moving into managing their own lives. And by using the 5 C's, you're helping them with that. That's what child development is about. It's developing into yourself as an adult. And someone has their mic on, and I don't know if it's Donna, but could you please turn your mic off, Donna? Thank you. Or Maria. I don't know which one it is. So thank you so much. So what I'd like you to do right now is to take a minute or 2 and name and prioritize the challenges in your family. What do you argue about the most? And I'd like you to share that with us in the chat space. What do you argue about most with your child? And why do you think you argue about that the most? So take a little bit of time and start typing. Thais, you argue about homework. I bet everyone can sympathize with that. Anybody else? Homework and listening. Anything else? Listening and follow directions. Daily chores. Okay. Someone's microphone is still on, so I'd really like you to check, please, because I hear it ticking. Daily chores. It's hard to pick one, but technology and also going on outdoor hikes and walks on the weekends. Popping up and down during dinner. Homework and just doing anything that you ask. Okay, so what I want to say to all of you is you are not alone. These are the most common challenges that I hear from families. Homework, listening, following directions, and cooperation. So let's talk a little bit about families and living with ADHD. So first of all, what I want to say is research has shown that there is increased parent-child conflict in families with living with ADHD. Oh, someone wrote technology, screen time, doing chores. Absolutely. So we're going to talk about a lot of these things today. So parents of kids with ADHD report more persistent stress than 83% of other parents. They can be more negative towards their child, especially when parents might rate a child's behavior or a teen's behavior as oppositional. And this is especially true for moms with challenging teens. And this comes out of a study by David Rabiner at Duke University. There are higher economic costs, 5 times more costly to raise a kid with ADHD than a neurotypical kid. Why? So additional costs include private tutoring, summer classes, computer software or other learning services beyond those that are provided for by the education system. Also replacing lost belongings and school supplies, dismissal from extracurricular activities, which means the parent has to lose daycare or leave work early or somehow struggle at work. There's also increased sibling conflict in families with ADHD, as I well know, whether there's jealousy, anger, frustration, resentment. There can be a lot more arguments between siblings. There's a higher rate of parental pessimism. Do any of you ever feel just a sort of down and out, kind of things are never going to change? There's isolation, and then there are many concerns for the child, including, will my child grow up and be able to live independently and successfully? Couple relationships are strained more often than not in families living with ADHD, as each parent is struggling with some of the challenges with their child, but also with different parenting styles and how they each might think one way is better than the other of actually intervening. And of course, there are working memory challenges with kids with ADHD. They have trouble holding on to something in their minds and doing an action with it. You tell them to get their shoes and meet you in the mudroom, and they don't get past going to their shoes because they get distracted with something. Kids with ADHD have trouble recalling past experiences and applying the lessons from those experiences to current issues. There are continued motivational difficulties, struggles to get started, and struggles to stay with something and then complete it. And so that has to do with sustained attention and goal-directed persistence. And of course, there is emotional dysregulation. Kids with ADHD often have big feelings that are tough for them to manage. So how do we create successful collaborations at home? So first, what you're going to do is work on brainstorming ideas without judgment or grimaces. You're going to be open to your child's suggestions and willing to try them, even if they don't make any sense to you, because we're trying to put something that your child wants to contribute into the stew, right? You're going to respond without reacting. And what's the difference between responding and reacting? Reacting is a knee-jerk process. Something happens and you just do something. Responding is a little bit more thoughtful. You stay centered and grounded. You're going to refrain from trying to discuss anything or process anything when people are upset. There is no way when anyone is under an amygdala takeover that they can actually think clearly and have a sane, rational conversation. Instead, what you want to do is put things on hold. And this is maybe difficult for you. You want to tell them how to do it different, or why you want to get it. They want to get into it with you. You need to set the limit. No, we're not going to talk about this now. We're going to talk about it later. You're going to expect to renegotiate and alter any programs as part of trial and error learning. There's a process of negotiation with these kids that often can be difficult, but kids today in your families expect to have a say, and they want to negotiate. Oftentimes kids with ADHD confuse compromise and negotiation, and they're very different. You know, negotiation is I'm going to talk with you, you're going to talk with me, we're going to work on a solution together, not I'm going to yell at you about what I want and you're going to give in to me. And I always say a good compromise is when everyone's unhappy. Your child gives a little, you give a little, it's not what anyone exactly wants, but you meet in the middle somehow. You're going to check in regularly to assess programs, and I highly recommend a weekly family meeting of no more than 15 minutes to check in on how things are going, get feedback, make any changes, and you're going to be open to being pleasantly surprised that things could be different, that you can make the changes that you're looking for. So let's talk a little bit about incentives. So we've talked before about the importance of incentives. So incentives are not bribes. In order to motivate kids, and there are, 3 or 4 components of many components of motivation, but I've isolated in your handout are initiation, time management, sustained attention, and goal-directed persistence. So in order for kids to be able to do things they don't like, and because they have less dopamine available to them in their brains, it's harder for them to work up excitement to do something that's not interesting. Those pathways of being able to see a reward, to feel, to be able to delay gratification are not very efficient. And so these kids are going to need incentives. And effective incentives motivate kids based on what we call extrinsic motivation, external motivation, and until intrinsic motivation kicks in. Now, when you are talking about intrinsic motivation, what we're talking about is the ability to set a goal for yourself and see that it's going to, you're going to achieve it. So there are 2 kinds of motivation. There's extrinsic motivation. You don't bring your permission slip in, you cannot go on the field trip. You are motivated to bring your permission slip in because of that you want to go on the field trip. Intrinsic motivation is you want to reach the next level of your game. You want to run your mile under 10 minutes. You set goals for yourself personally and you meet them. Now, intrinsic motivation doesn't really kick in until the late teens or early 20s. So what does that mean? Because that's neurotypical brains. In ADHD brains, there's that 3-year delay. So we're talking early 20s to mid 20s. And so what has to happen is that we use external, extrinsic motivators to help kids learn ultimately to set up intrinsic motivators. I don't know about you, but I like to do my dishes before I watch my show on TV. Why? Because if I watch my show first, I'm not going to do my dishes. And I don't want to come downstairs in the morning with a, huge pile of dishes. So I've learned that I'm going to do my dishes first. I still hear somebody, so check on your microphone, please. So what we're going to do is help our kids set external motivators so ultimately they can set internal motivators. I've learned over time, you've learned over time that you have to do sometimes you have to do that icky stuff first. You have to clean out the cat litter when you get home so you don't have to do it before you go to bed when you're tired. So what has to happen is that kids with ADHD need parents to create these external structures and to stick with them. And that's really challenging for a lot of families with ADHD because, as we know, 57% of people, adults with ADHD, have a child with ADHD. So we're going to break tasks down into smaller chunks to reduce overwhelm and procrastination. And we're going to use natural and logical consequences instead of punishment. So what is a natural consequence? This is the inevitable result of a person's own actions. You tell your daughter to wear a coat, it's cold outside, she doesn't, and the consequence is that she feels cold. That's a natural consequence. A logical consequence is the result of a person's actions, but they're imposed on by an adult or a caregiver. You tell your son not to skateboard in the street, and he does. The logical consequence is that he hasn't shown you the maturity needed to ride the skateboard, and he has to earn it back. Logical consequences are best used when a child's actions can result in harm to him or her. They must be reasonable and they must be related to the problem at hand. If your child goes over their time for their technology and argues with you about it, a logical consequence is that they have less of that time the next day. If your child yells at you and you take away their phone, those things are very different. So the taking away the phone is a punishment. What else could you do when your child is yelling at you instead of taking away the phone? These are things that we should talk about tonight. One of the things that helps kids with ADHD and their motivation is finding something that is interesting to them, that matters to them as a motivator. And this requires sitting down with them and doing a big brainstorm. And there are small motivators and bigger motivators. So if you're looking for something that you want to help your child get through avoiding the homework hassle so that they have something that's their break for 5 minutes. That's one set of little incentives. And then when they finish their homework, maybe they earn something bigger. So you have to kind of discuss it. And it's not always screen time. It could be time with you. It could be actually watching a show with you or playing cards or doing something that matters to them other than going on their technology. We talked a little bit about this last time, that, most of us are on information overload, and multitasking doesn't really exist in the brain, but we all do it. We do email, we talk on the phone, we read, we drive, we eat, all at the same time. Over 80% of teens report media multitasking, but it doesn't really exist in the brain. What happens is it slows productivity, and it changes how kids learn, and it can increase superficiality in social relationships. When we're splitting our attention, we are switching from one thing to another, and we're using up the glucose center in the brain, our fuel in our brain. And so what happens is there's a release of the hormone cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And we feel depleted and overwhelmed because our brain is out of fuel and we're relying on cortisol to keep us going. It's like driving your car on fumes. As we're switching, we're not concentrating on either task. And you need a mental warm-up of somewhere between 7 to 10 seconds for the suspended task, and the efficiency will go down. So, when people are multitasking, attention is divided and you can't integrate new information as well. And so you become used to focusing on things for a shorter period of time. Multitasking is a problem in families because as parents, we are overwhelmed. And so we're talking to them, helping them with homework, doing the dishes all at the same time. And we're actually not really paying full attention to any of those things. And that's very frustrating, particularly for kids with ADHD who want to feel like they matter, that they have your attention. All kids actually want that. But for these kids in particular who struggle with low self-esteem, having your full attention really does make a difference. So I'd like to ask you, what types of multitasking do you do? Myself, I will eat and talk on the phone. I will eat and do my email. I will talk on the phone and be on my computer. I will talk on the phone and drive. Those are the main ways that I multitask. And I'm not proud of any of them. And I'm trying really hard to try to change that. How about you? What do you guys do for multitasking? Definitely doing the dishes and talking to the kids at the same time, eating and reading, talking on the phone, emptying the dishwasher, driving, walking the dog, taking care of the house, dog, and the parent, cooking and helping with homework. So we all do this. And I'm curious, do you find that you're effective when you're multitasking, or does something drop, something not as great? Podcasts, checking work email and parenting, switching between things on the calendar, something drops. I've actually stopped talking on the phone when I was cooking because I had a few disasters where I was baking something and I forgot baking soda. And I'm really perplexed about why it didn't turn out. And then I remember, oh, I was talking on the phone, right? Um, if one task is mindless, then it's okay, but not if you need to think. Burn stuff in the kitchen. I always say you can't be 100% of everything all the time, but that doesn't feel good. It doesn't feel good. And it doesn't feel good when your kids feel less connected. So I'm curious, what do you notice that your kids do for multitasking? Are they doing some of the things that you do? Have they created their own ways of multitasking? What do you see your kids with ADHD doing for multitasking? Okay, so none of your kids multitask? Oh, no, here we go. Um, Homework and YouTube. Homework and YouTube. I don't think my son can multitask. Excellent. Single tasking, but jumping around to different things. Very interesting, Justine. I think we should talk about this. Reading and eating, watching TV and trying to listen to me. So I think it is possible to read and eat, to look at a newspaper while you're eating or watching TV and maybe listening. But what people can't do is they can't listen to you and watch TV. They can't listen to you and have a phone conversation, and they certainly can't do homework and switch back and forth to YouTube videos. I think the idea of single tasking but jumping around is interesting because what actually they're doing is they're switching to stay interested, but they are actually multitasking because they're switching so quickly from thing to thing that their brain doesn't have a chance to do a warm up and catch up to and sort of transition to the new thing. So how are we going to help kids stop multitasking and start doing one thing at a time? What do you think is the best way to teach kids how to do one thing at a time? Any ideas? Role model it. That's exactly right. Modeling it ourselves. And this is difficult for us because I don't know about you, but I feel like I have too much to do every day, all the time. And so the question is, how can we put our phones down when we're paying attention to our kids? Because what happens is kids feel like the phone is more important than they are. And I know that's not the truth, but that's their experience. So one of the things that I would encourage you to do is actually be aware of when you're multitasking and stop. Notice it and stop something. If you're on your phone and you're parenting or supervising your kids, then you're not actually supervising your kids. If you're having family work time, that's different. Everybody's engaged and you're available if they need something. But if you are actively driving with them and talking on the phone to someone else, then you're not really in the present moment. And kids with ADHD have a now, not now brain. They're in the moment and they would like you to join them. It's frustrating for them when they feel like the smartphone isn't so smart, actually. It's more important than they are. And this is a challenge for us. So we want to model this the best way that we can. And if we have to make an exception, if we have to say to them, hey, you know what? I'm actually, I need to talk on the phone right now. Excuse me, I'll be back in a minute. Then you are actively letting them know that you are stepping away, you're taking a pause, and then you come back with your phone down. I encourage you when you come home, put your phone down, interact with your child, engage with your child. Um, Kids really want to have some time at home with their parents, with their attention. I heard one girl told me that she went skiing with her father, and while they were on the ski lift, he was on his phone, and she was so hurt. She's like, here I am, I'm skiing with you on the ski chair, on the whatever chairlift, excuse me, and you're on your phone. Laura, sometimes I feel like my kids don't allow me the space to do one thing at a time. I hear you. For example, when I'm trying to cook, they're both talking at me or asking me to play things, or if I'm trying to get us out the door for school, they're interrupting my flow with questions or important conversations. Yes, that is the challenge of parenting. But if you are not on your phone, then you manage that more effectively. I think it's important for you to be able to say to your kids, my ears can only hear one thing at a time. So let's stop, you go first, and then you go. Or it's hard for me to cook while you're both talking to me. And so that's a good time for technology. I encourage you to give them their daily dose of technology when it works for you. And if that's during cooking, let them have that at that time so you can actually focus. We want to use their technology to serve you and some of your needs so you can be the best parent you can be. Kids also don't quite understand that their parents can't do everything at the same time. And, it's the classic ADHD teenager, or child. You come home and your kid's waving their permission form for that trip for middle school. You need to sign this right away. And you have, your arms full with 2 bags of groceries, and it's been raining and you're wet. And, there's no sort of awareness of where you are, what your needs might be. And so in those moments, the most important thing you can do is to kindly talk to them and say, hey, let me come in the door. I see that you have something important. I need to take my coat off and deal with the groceries. Put it right here on the counter, and I promise I'll come back to it. You reassure them that you've seen their need and you're going to get to it, and then you do. So I'm curious, what kinds of incentives do you think matter to your child? I'd like to hear, some of the things that you've used that have worked and some of the things that haven't. So what kinds of incentives are you using now with your kids that work? Time one-on-one with a parent. That is such a great incentive. I call that private time. And having time alone with your parent, makes you feel special, important, held. It's really fantastic. Tech time is also a good one. Outings together, fantastic. Kelly, you haven't found anything that works. We're going to, come back to you in a minute. Time to play a game, watch a special show, family board games. Excellent. I think board games are a wonderful way to engage your kids. And whether it's dominoes or Sorry, kids like to play games. Donna, you're the only parent, and it's frustrating because she doesn't really know what that entails. She doesn't understand your experience. I understand that. I think, Donna, when you are a single parent and you have MS, you're right, your child doesn't explain. Did I say your child doesn't explain? Excuse me. Your child doesn't understand. And so it may be important for you to say, Mom can only do this. Mom can only do that. And she's going to be disappointed and angry. And you can acknowledge that. That's the thing to do. Own it, acknowledge it, and validate. Some candy, cheap, new, free apps, TV, clothes. Clearly candy isn't great, but sometimes whatever works. There's the sometimes rule with incentives. Ideally, you want to do X and Y, but sometimes you need to do Z. And that's okay. That's what makes it an exception and something special. So Let's talk a little bit about how we can help kids with some of these specific executive functioning skills, and the kinds of incentives we can use for them. So we're going to try to build inhibition, which means verbal and behavioral control and emotional control. And how are we going to do this? The best thing is you have to slow things down. When you're in an emotional overload, when your child is an emotional overload, things snowball super quickly. And what happens is there's an enormous escalation. We want to slow the process down. In fact, Kayla, age 17, said to me, it's like being a volcano that's ready to explode at all times. There are bubbles of big things inside of me. Sometimes they radiate out and sometimes they explode. So we're going to work on responding, not reacting. And this means that we're going to, in a calm moment, we're going to sit down and say, I notice that we're arguing about X. I notice that you're losing your temper about Y. I see this happening and it's not working for you, because kids feel upset after they do this. They feel bad about themselves and it's not working for me because I'm getting upset and then that makes things worse. So we're going to try to do something different. And this plan for doing something different is called stop, think, act. Most people act, then they stop, then they think about it. We're going to shift that. We're going to stop. We're going to call a pause in the action. And this is the hardest part of self-control. Noticing when you're becoming triggered. What happens? Knot in your stomach, louder voice, your face feels hot. Identify what that is for you and for your son or daughter. Okay, this is a sign that you're heading down the path. As I like to say, going over the cliff like Wile E. Coyote. I'm dating myself here, but those of you who watched Roadrunner understand. So we're going to have a stop. And in this pause, it's going to be our attempt to recalibrate, right? That's what our GPS tells us when we get lost. We're not mad at it. It's just recalculating. So that's what we're going to do. And we're going to recalculate by setting in advance, what are things that help you calm down? And so in that stop, we're going to have a list of what those things are. Maybe it's, getting a hug from you. At the time you least want to give a hug. Maybe it's reading a story. Maybe you need to go open the door and get some fresh air. Maybe your child needs to run around the living room or shoot some hoops. Whatever it is, you're going to call a pause in the action. And once people are triggered, it takes about 10 to 15 minutes for their system to calm down. So how is that pause going to actually work? Some families I've worked with have created calm me down boxes. Go to the dollar store, you fill it up with stuff, and it's used only in those moments. And there are things that kids like, so they want to use their calm me down box. Sometimes kids want to go in their room and listen to music, older kids. Whatever it is, you set a time. And you can have it be a time apart where people are doing their own thing, or you can try to be together and work through it. Of course, there's always the going to the bathroom option, which is a great option for you and for your kids to go in, take a minute, or have a drink of water somewhere. We want to make a list of what are the things that help them calm down. How would you call the stop? I will explain to kids that we're going to do stop, think, act. And I'm going to call a stop. And you could just say, stop. It's a time apart. And I don't use timeout because timeout implies that they're bad. Timeout, you're being sent to your room to deal with emotions that you can't really figure out. Time apart is we all need a break from this current situation for a limited time. Then we come back together for the think. And the think is actually discussing what was happening. What was going on for you that you bit your sister? What was upsetting to you about the fact that I sent you upstairs, to go to bed? Why didn't you like that? You are taking time to talk about it, and you're encouraging them to use their words in a slow way rather than their feelings, acting it out. And you are going to do reflective listening. You are angry that I sent you upstairs because your sister didn't have to go upstairs. I see. Yes, you're reflecting back with your observation or noticing. I noticed that when your brother knocked over your Lego, you bit him. Were you mad that he knocked over your Lego? Yes. What do you think a better choice might have been? You ask that question. You also ask, where do we go from here? You're interested in the act. What is the next right thing to do? How do we move forward right now? You're not going to process this event. You're not going to tell them why they can't do this anymore. You're just going to figure out where to move from here. Later, or the next day when things have calmed down, then you can go back and revisit and discuss it and maybe teach a lesson. But in this moment, we're in a crisis and we have to do some crisis management. And you can't teach anything in the middle of a crisis. What we're going to do is we're going to identify the triggers. We're going to name some of the negative thinking or behaviors that are contributing to these triggers, and we're going to validate when they're upset. I see that you're upset. I see that you're afraid. You're not going to reassure them. You're not going to try to make it better. You're just going to acknowledge that it's there. You're helping them learn to tolerate their big feelings while you yourself are tolerating their big feelings. So how do we build working memory? This is a question parents ask me a lot. And the thing about working memory is that really we have to do it by lists, Post-its, having a routine with pictures if they don't read, or steps that they need to follow so that they are going back to that checklist on their own or with your direction instead of you telling them what they need to do. If you continue to remind them about what the next thing is for them to do, you continue to act as their working memory. And they're not learning the sequencing, they're not learning the organizing, they're not learning how to make a list of what they need to do for themselves later on. And this is a skill that obviously serves us throughout life. The other thing that we want to do is talk about how you give reminders. So a lot of times parents will shout from one room to another, "Get your shoes, come to dinner." And are your kids listening? No, they're doing this. They're not listening. They're looking at their screen. They're not looking at you, and they're not paying attention. So what we want to do is change how you give directions. And I call this the rule of three. And it's actually very simple and straightforward. And it may sound like more work than yelling across the room, but it's about a bazillion times more effective. Here's how it works. You get on your child's eye level. And if they are comfortable being touched, you can touch them. But essentially you say, your eyes on my eyes. And if they have trouble with eye contact and they're looking around, you keep bringing them back to your face. Then you state the direction. I want you to get your shoes and meet me at the door. You ask them to repeat that direction. Shoes. No. I want you to get your shoes and meet me at the door. What am I asking you to do? Get shoes and go to the door? Yes. Tell me it again. Get shoes and go to the door. Correct. Now, this kind of giving directions, I call it the rule of three. Eye contact, you state something, they repeat it back to you. Helps encode information into their working memory because you have their attention, you're looking at them, you may have a hand on their shoulder to actually ground them. You're stating the request. They are repeating the request twice, so you know that they've heard it. Now, teenagers will roll their eyes at you and say, I'm not going to do that. That's stupid. And you're going to say, you know what? We're having trouble with you following directions. So for the next week, I'd like you to do this, repeat it twice. And if we get this down, we can cut to one repetition. But right now, I'm tired of arguing about things with you, and I don't know if you've actually heard me. I need to know that you've heard me. And so this will help you know that they've heard you. How do we help kids get started? I have done that, but then he will leave to get something and doesn't do it. So then what is he showing you, Kelly? A, the direction might be too complicated. And B, if it's a simple direction and he can't do it, then he actually is not able yet to retain it into his working memory. And he may need you to do things or shadow him, which is really annoying, particularly in the morning when you have your own stuff to do to get out of the house. But there, I think it will be helpful is if you tell him to do something and he doesn't do it, and you see that, then you actually need to follow him and tell him again. And this is very labor intensive. I wish I could give you a better technique or tool that isn't so demanding on you, but I just don't have it because it's not there. That he needs more time and help from you. So how do we help kids avoid procrastinating? So as we talked about last week with school, we want to break things down into small, achievable parts. And you want to have a daily guideline of what there is to do and perhaps alerts or notifications, because kids procrastinate. And one boy, Marcello, said to me, "I'm the best procrastinator ever." My dad says, "Don't worry about it because your mom and I do the same thing." So kids struggle with getting started. And so that means with chores or homework, it has to be broken down into smaller chunks. And that includes with directions. If your child can't go get their shoes by themselves, then there has to be a plan, which is maybe the shoes have to live near the front door so that they don't have to go upstairs to get their shoes, because as soon as your child leaves the room, they may forget what the thing is that they have to do, and you're not within earshot to remind them. Time management. How are we going to build time management? We're going to build time management with direct instruction. Time responds very well to direct instruction and cues. So because it's a now or not now brain, if you have to study for a boring spelling test now because the test is tomorrow, that may not be enough of a turnaround. That tomorrow seems many years off, or particularly if it's Thursday and it's only Tuesday. So we want to help kids understand that, and we're going to use backwards design. Does anyone know what backwards design is? Yes. Okay. Anybody else? Great. So backwards design, for those of you who, and Chris, you know, Maria, you know a little bit. So what it means is you start at the time. So let's say you want to leave your house at 8 to drive to school. And so you start subtracting. Yes, analog clocks. And I was actually going to say something about that, Donna. Analog clocks are the best way to teach time management because kids see time go by. I'm a super fan of time timers as well. Those are very helpful because kids see they have, 45 minutes of blue, and then the blue disappears and it's down to this much. There's not much blue left. That's a sign there's not much time left. It's hard for kids with ADHD to feel time, and that takes a while for them to understand. So when you work your way backwards, you start at the end goal. The end goal is we're going to leave at 8 o'clock in the morning. It takes 15 minutes to eat and make breakfast, so now we're at 7:45. It takes 15 minutes to get dressed and brush your teeth. Now we're at 7:30. It takes 15 minutes for you to wake up and get out of bed. I wake you up and then it's a struggle. So now I'm at 7:15, and I need to have time for something going wrong, grabbing your lunch, whatever, spilling milk. So I'm going to wake you at 7 o'clock. And that's how you start to teach them how to manage their time. You're working backwards from the end goal. And this is helpful for kids. And you can also have a conversation. Well, let's see how long it takes, or this is what I observe how long it takes. For older kids, they have some idea, but for younger kids, they really don't. So for organization, we're going to use what I call self-smart systems. Your kids each have an idea of how to organize themselves. Sometimes it's color coding. Sometimes um, it's alphabetical or numerical. We're going to use the what kind of organizing system makes sense to them. And so I've had kids who like to organize their clothes by color. I've had kids who want to organize their notebook in order of the classes that they see. Let's find out what makes sense to your child. For that girl who wanted to organize her clothes by color, she had a closet with with shelves, and her mom was absolutely opposed to organizing by color because you need to have your pants together, you need to have your shirts together, you need to have your, sweaters together. And, she was actually, the mother, of course, was a professional organizer. And so we had numerous therapy sessions. Well, why? Like, what's the difference? And it took a while for mom to let go of her idea of how things should be. And actually, what the daughter said is, I like to have my clothes in colors because someday I feel like purple and I want all my purple clothes together. And what happened is, instead of all the stuff being thrown out and put on the floor, she was able to see her clothes in the colors that she wanted. So we want to ask kids what makes sense to them. And we want to help them make some lists. Instead of telling your child, go clean your room, there should be a list of what it means to clean your room. You could expect to sit there with your child while they're cleaning their room, and maybe you're the sock folder, maybe you help them move along the list. Many kids need what's called a body double to do chores. They can't really do them themselves, and they don't want to. Try to gamify it. See how fast they can pick up 20 items from the floor. Maybe race them and see who can pick up the most items in 1 minute. Play music that they like. So you want to start to realize that you actually are going to have to be involved in some of these things. And over time, you can step back. Use Post-its. Post-its are great tools for reminders, of course, but they also can be organizing. You can help them put a few things together by having the Post-its in different places. It's important to have some kind of family calendar that kids can see. Now, one family may use Google Cal, and that's fine. But sometimes kids need a whiteboard at home to see what's the week going to look like. They can't necessarily visualize it in their head, and even if it's on their phone, it's not so easy to see. And so when they have a sense of Monday I come home at 4, Tuesday I come home at 5, Wednesday, Dad is at work, we have pizza for dinner, whatever it is, this helps them understand the ideas of routines. And by understanding the ideas of routines, they learn the process of being able to routinize themselves. Excuse me. I'm sorry, 1 second. I'm in our family home office, and my husband just got home and he has to get his thing. So we have a break. Do we have any questions so far about what I've discussed? Any questions about time management, organization, getting started? Okay, we're going to resume. No questions so far, everybody? Okay. So right now, what I'm talking about is how we can improve each of the executive functioning skills. So we've been through a number of them. I want to talk a little bit about sustained attention and goal-directed persistence. We spoke last time about how switching screens perpetuates this inability for kids to really stick with something. And earlier we talked about the multitasking and the challenges of media multitasking. What we want to discuss now is really how to reduce distractions. It's very important for kids to understand and identify what are things that distract them. Again, sit down, have a conversation, make a list. What are the things that are distracting to you? I had a girl who came into my office and she said, Well, I was so bored in class, Dr. Sharon, she was in high school. She said, I made an F box. And I said, what's an F box? And she said, it's a box of effing distractions. And I thought that was just so funny because she was starting to identify that she drifts off. And I think I mentioned this last time, but we want to help kids learn to start to monitor, to identify what distracts them. And this actually helps build that last executive function to develop, which is self-evaluation, or what we call metacognition, self-awareness, self and judgment. Consider potential obstacles to getting things done and brainstorm possible solutions. If your child cannot vacuum the living room all the way through, then what actually needs to happen? Is there a different chore that might be easier for them to accomplish? Talk about that with them. If they love vacuuming, that's great. And maybe they want to do 2 rooms of vacuuming and not take the trash out. Talk about it. See if you can come up with some kind of agreement. Helping kids shift from one thing to another and building their flexibility takes time. And the way the kids adapt to change is through warnings about what's coming next and what they're going to need. This can be helped by that whiteboard, which has a list of what's coming this week, and can be helped by a list of daily, morning activities. I had one mom take a picture of her daughter in the beginning of the year with her coat and her backpack and her lunchbox. And then she put it up on the refrigerator and she said, do you look like this? If so, go to the car. And so in the mornings when the child wasn't quite ready, the mom would say to her, have you checked your picture? Check your picture. Do you have everything in the picture? And so the daughter started to build a sense of awareness of what was missing and what was still needed. Now, to build this self-evaluation, this metacognition, this last executive functioning skill, we want to ask kids open-ended questions that foster self-reflection. We want to assist them in identifying and using body sensations to increase self-awareness. And we want to reframe self-evaluation from good and bad to what's working and what's not working. We want to stick with a motto of doing more of what works. And we want to teach how to do that. We want to teach kids how to look someone in the eye, how to understand a message that a face is sending them or a body is sending them, what an appropriate amount of space is between you and another person. In our culture, it's around 3 feet or your arm's length. And so if you're closer than your arms to another person, you're probably too close. And that will affect social relationships. So how are we going to create home routines that work? You're going to use incentives that matter. You're going to revisit these plans with a weekly check-in and make those changes, and you're going to change incentives as they develop consistency. For morning routines, you have to use a checklist and establish some kind of cueing or reminder system. You give them items they can already do, a few they're working on, and a few you'd like to see them move towards. So for example, you could have a routine of 5 things. And if they get 3 out of those 5 things, maybe they can earn picking the song in the car on the way to school, or they could earn 15 minutes of screen time, or playing a game of cards, or whatever it is before school or maybe after school. We don't want to have them have to earn all 5 things all the time. That may be too much. We could start with 3, then go up to 4, and give them a chance. Because not every day is going to be an easy day. Some days are going to be a little more challenging than others. We also are going to create evening routines. Now, again, there's always exceptions, and I'm not expecting you to be perfect and do these all the time, but we want to have a plan. What is the plan when you get home from school? Is there an after dinner plan? Does it include something fun, either with you or without you? Some kind of interpersonal connection time is really important with your kids. Is there adequate chilling time? What's worked and what hasn't? I worked with a family, and the little boy would come home, and he would literally, the mom said, we'd walk in the door and he would start rolling around on the floor. And I said, well, why are you doing that? And he said, because I need my flippy floppy time. I said, well, what's that? He said, well, I'm in school all day and I come home, I need my flippy floppy time. And the mom was rolling her eyes. And so I said, okay, let's institute family flippy floppy time. You come home and we clear out the coffee table and everyone gets 5 minutes of stretching, rolling. If you want to lie on the couch, your middle school child wants to lie on the couch and doesn't want to do that, that's fine. But you get those 5 minutes, you set the timer, and then you can transition into the next phase. So I have a couple questions. I want to answer those. One question, if they accomplish from their list 3 out of the 5 items, is that what we're rewarding with an incentive? Sure, why not? But you have to talk about that in advance. If you get these 3 things, you earn this. If you get these 5 things, you earn this, you earn that. You can make it as complicated or as simple as you want, but you want to incentivize them. And the 3 things, what I would encourage you to do is to create a list of 5 things, and at least 2 of them are things they already know how to do, and 2 are things they can't do, or they need support with, or they struggle with. And so that you have them try to do 4 things or 3 things, 2 that they can do and 1 that they're learning. And then when they get that 3rd thing, you can do 4. The after-school routine is a tough part. There are so many activities for each of my 3 children, and each day varies. Yes, I understand that. That's true for many families. And that's actually why having a whiteboard with a list of what the activities are that you could go over the night before or that morning to remind them, because the kids themselves are feeling a little overwhelmed and you're running in 24 different directions. So kind of prepare them. That will assist their ability to transition. Are they working toward managing their own list or checklist without reminders? Ideally, yes. So what you say to them, instead of saying the next thing on the list, is you say, check your list, check your list. And for younger kids, sometimes just getting a smiley sticker is great, but sometimes older kids need something more than that. I had one family, I live in Massachusetts, and there's a grocery store called Big Y, and they give out these coins. And for this child, when he was in 2nd grade, all he wanted was the coins. He didn't care what they represented. He just wanted to be able to get coins. So, kids are all very different in what matters to them. But ideally, you want to shift them into working on their list. This particular boy that I was just telling you about, he had a lot of difficulty getting ready for school on time. And so what mom figured out is that she could feed him breakfast. And then if he got downstairs, had breakfast successfully, that he could watch TV and put his clothes on. And that kind of helped him watch TV and put his clothes on. And then he brushed his teeth at the kitchen sink, and they were able to go on for the day. That was her way of creating a morning routine. That may not be your way, but it works. What if all they want as an incentive is more screen time? Okay, that is the $24 million question. So the thing is, and I'm going to talk about this more next week, but what I want to say with screen time is you have to decide how much screen time each day you want your child to have. And then, so if you want your child to have an hour of screen time, then they get an automatic amount of time, like 20 minutes, and then the other 40 minutes they earn. And if that's what they want, that's what they get. But you can also brainstorm with them to have a list that's bigger than just screen time. Screen time can be one thing, it cannot be the only thing. And that's okay for you to say. Maybe it's listening to a book on tape. Maybe it's drawing. Maybe it's cooking. You can't do that every day, of course, make cookies, but come up with a list. When we're talking about evening routines, one of the things that I want to suggest is that you do something at night called the clean sweep. And that is, before you go upstairs or you go into your bedrooms, you go through the house and you pick up and put away things that need to go away. You create the backpack for tomorrow with most of the things in it, and so that you're organized. So there's a clean sweep where you put stuff, you put stuff away, and then which everyone puts their own hopefully their own stuff or just gathers up their stuff, and then you can help them. And then you organize the backpack, what I call the next day prep. So maybe whatever clothes you need, whatever, put your books in there, everything except, maybe your lunch, which you want to prepare fresh for the day. That's up to you. We have had the same routine in the morning for the last 5 years. It is normal. Is it normal for him not to be able to follow this routine? Yes. And here's why I say yes so quickly. It takes a long time, a longer time for kids with ADHD to metabolize a routine. Their working memory challenges, their processing speed challenges interfere with their ability to get it. Plus, your child is probably working on a number of skills simultaneously in that routine and is overwhelmed by having to do all those things. Is the routine too complicated? Is there a way in which you could possibly simplify things? Make sure that they maybe have them get dressed with you upstairs in the bedroom, brush your teeth together before you go downstairs or go into the kitchen. Figure out a way about what might help them understand the morning routine, and perhaps even ask them, what part of the routine do you think you forget the most? And what makes it hard to remember that? And they hopefully will have some idea of what that is. But again, it does take time, and that can be very trying for your patients. You'll see in your handout that I have a sample list of a routine. I have the tasks: get out of bed, go to the bathroom, etc., and the point totals. So you decide, again, there's 6 items on that. How many of those do you have to achieve before you get your incentive or your points? Some kids like points, some kids like big Y coins, and some kids want to earn something that matters to them immediately. And some kids can delay until after school. Be prepared for setbacks. It is more challenging and more time demanding and requires more patience to teach kids with ADHD some of these home routines and home behaviors. Try not to see setbacks as failures. Struggles are feedback for you that you need to tweak what you're doing and it's not working. Again, we have a motto: do more of what works and less of what doesn't. If you're struggling, what you're doing isn't working, let's try to figure out why. So we have time now. I left plenty of time today for more questions. What are the routines that you're doing? Are they working? And if they're not working, what do you think is getting in the way of success? What are some of the obstacles you're seeing? I'd love to hear from you, Kelly, about what do you notice is making it hard for your child to follow his routine? And I'd like to hear about, from Thais, how you can improve the after-school routine, you think. What would help your kids understand what's coming? So please, let's start to ask some questions. I really want to have a dialogue. Listening is the hardest thing for him. So is the routine posted on a refrigerator where he can see what it is rather than you continuing to remind him? Because if you're his reminder machine, he doesn't have to hold it in his head, and he doesn't have to learn how to be responsible for looking at what's in front of him. Anyone else with some questions? Okay, mornings, Maria says, are hard. What works is, I'm going to go back to Kelly for a second. I'm his reminder. The tasks are simple: get up, get dressed. You cannot be his reminder. So if the tasks are simple, you get up, you get dressed, etc. You may have to continue to remind him of that, but you could put a chart upstairs and down, and you could try to do some of those tasks, have him do them with him, try to gamify it, time him, create an incentive. If you can get downstairs and be dressed and be at the breakfast table by 7:30, you can earn a little, you can play with my phone in the car on the way to school or whatever. I'm not saying you necessarily want to use screens all the time as your incentive, but try to figure out what would help. Um, Maria, mornings are difficult. What works is either her or us picking out clothes the night before, then she has plenty of time to dawdle in the morning. Great. I think actually picking out clothes the night before is a great solution for kids with ADHD. Some kids don't like to do it. I actually have had many kids take their bath, put their clothes on for the next day, and go to sleep in their clothes. So they don't have to actually go through the struggle of picking new clothes every day. Sometimes they don't care. Their clothes are clean, they're sleeping in them, and it saves the hassle of arguing. I've also had girls, particularly girls, who feel like they don't want to pick their clothes out the night before because they aren't sure what they're going to feel like wearing. And in those situations, maybe they can pick out two options. So they have option A or option B. Because what happens is if you spend a lot of time thinking about your clothes, there goes your morning routine. We have a routine and he can follow it. Terrific, Emily. But he doesn't have a sense of time. Each step takes very long. Do I make him get up earlier? You could do that. You could also use something called a watch minder, which you can buy. It's not like an Apple Watch or a Fitbit, but it's a watch that kids can wear that will buzz when they need to move on to the next activity or to set alarms or alerts. And that might be helpful. Steps take a long time, then yes, I think having extra time to wake up if they're willing to do that. If not, I would encourage some kind of timer system that the timer buzzes, or again, using a time timer. Here's 5 minutes. When this is done, you need to be downstairs and ready. So, it's hard to stay on task in the morning for a lot of kids with ADHD. If they're not taking medication, it's naturally hard. And if they are taking medication, their medication generally hasn't kicked in. And so the mornings are one of the toughest times for families living with ADHD because of that. Will it really take until the 20s to be able to internalize these tasks? Well, it takes a long time. By the time kids get into adolescence, things are internalized. But what's not necessarily there is intrinsic motivation for tasks that seem unpleasant. And so I think having a realistic expectation that still kids will need external help with external motivators for doing things they really dislike is realistic. Thais, you have a whiteboard coded by child. Wow, awesome. We also have an individual oversized Post-its in their room with what's going on for the week. That is so incredible. Bravo to you. But every day is different. So the routine is consistently inconsistent, if that makes sense. Yes, it does. And I'm sorry to hear that because that makes it much harder for you and much harder for them. I think you've done the best you can. By letting them know what color they are and what's coming. And you're just living in a chaotic period. And I think accepting that and them accepting that and the effect that that's going to have on you is important. My 15-year-old, I literally say every day, check Google Classroom, check PowerSchool, take photos of your homework, and email upload to Google Drive, load the dishwasher, and every day it's not done until I literally sit with him to do it. I will put together a checklist for him, hoping that it may work. That's a good idea. But here's the thing. You've just given like 4 things that you need your child to do. Your child is 15, but developmentally, in terms of some of these skills, your child may be 12. And that's a big leap for a kid who's 12 to check Google Classroom, check PowerSchool, take photos of the homework, email and upload to Google Drive. Ask them to work on one of those, one thing at a time. And then you can do the other things with them. But work with them maybe on just taking photos of their homework. That might be enough for right now. And hopefully there will be some progress in that. I have 1 or 2 reminders set for my Alexa. Excellent. Yes, I have some families using Alexa. Take meds, leave for bus. How does that work, Justine? I'm sure it gives you a break from being a reminder. Does Rose listen to it? I don't know how much of this is him being 15 and how much is the ADHD, the perfect storm. Yes, the answer to that is yes. It's both of those things put together. And there's a whole hormonal soup that's going on in his brain that's complicating things. But so what I would encourage you to do is, again, pick one thing that he would think would be a thing that he would like to change, and hopefully work with him on that. And then you hold up the other things and slowly you can add those into the mix. Alexa works great. I've heard that from some other parents. And what kids like about it, it's technology, but it's technology for a purpose that's helping them. So that's great. Alexa is just for her and you. The kitchen clock is set for 10 minutes ahead of time, saves you. That is great. I actually personally, because I struggle with time management, I set my clocks several minutes ahead as well. Unfortunately, I remember that I did that, so that doesn't always help me, but good for you. I think that's a great solution. On the family meetings, if we have one child with ADHD and one child without, should we include them both in the meeting? Yes. The idea is that you want to teach executive functioning skills to all the kids in your family. Everybody can benefit, and your child with ADHD may need some skill boosting in some area, and your child without ADHD might need some skill boosting in a different area. Everybody can benefit. In fact, you and your partner can probably benefit. I know that, all of us have executive functioning skill challenges. As I've said before, mine's emotional control and time management. And so when we're working on things with our kids, we can say, I'm going to work on this thing. You're going to work on this thing. Here's how we're going to do it. Or maybe we share this. We could work on it together. Can you review the question to kick off the family meeting? Sure. You can ask, how are we doing as a family? That's a great question. Or you could say, I'd like to just check in. I noticed that we're having some issues about X. I'd want to see how we could do X differently. Or I feel like the mornings are complicated. I'd like to see how we might be able to do them better. Or I'm noticing that this is going really well. I'm very excited about that. And I wonder if we can take some of these skills and put them to something else. So I think, how are we doing as a family is a good question. It may be too broad. Kids will say, fine. So try, if you can ask the question about something more specific, you might get more feedback. Now, there were a couple questions that people emailed me from last week, so I just want to touch those off. Dina asked, where can you find the executive functioning skills test? So executive functioning skills tests, you can find them online. There are some good examples. There's one actually in my book that you can use. Peg Dawson and Richard Guare, who wrote Smart But Scattered, have a number of exercises in their books as well. Dina also said that I would like to share a little on how you've impacted homework time. My son has nonverbal learning disability, and although it's different from ADHD, I've been using the tools that you've taught us. He needs a lot of guidance when doing homework, and homework times with him and Dad mostly end up in meltdowns. Today they did homework twice. The first session was a potential trigger. The second was a success. I sat down with my husband today and shared my observations and prompted him with questions and wrote the answers down. Fantastic. That is so great to hear. In the first session, my husband tried to control the homework, which didn't work. And in the second session, he collaborated. So it's a tiny step. So it's these kinds of tiny steps that I think are so important because they give you hope. And Donna had a question about executive functioning that she emailed me. What part of the brain is not developed when children get in their own way? My daughter has issues with admitting to her wrongs. She can never see her part in situations that may be involving her. So there's no particular part of the brain for that. That has to do with maturity, but it also has to do with shame. A lot of times kids with ADHD are defensive because they actually feel bad about themselves inside. They wish they were different. They wish they could do things differently. They sometimes lie or tell falsehoods because they have trouble admitting when things didn't go well or when they did something impulsive that they regret. And so what we want to try to do is to neutralize their shame or reduce it by letting them know that people make mistakes. It's part of the process. And you kids will get in their own way. And just like we adults get in our own way sometimes. We all, sabotage ourselves. And what would be helpful is to have a time where you can talk to your daughter. What did you do that helped you with X? What did you do that may have held you back or made the situation more complicated? What are other options? And maybe instead of even saying, what did you do? What are some things that happened that you wish you could change? Where then it's not about her, if she's particularly sensitive or defensive. So you're broadening the question to include something wider. Are there any more questions about tonight, family meetings, reminders? It would be great if you are willing to try a different type of morning routine this week, using perhaps the handout, the guide for the task list that's in your handout, or something that you yourself create. And then we can have some feedback about it next week about what worked and what actually you need some help with. I'm so happy that this was helpful for you, Maria, and I really want to be able to assist you in some of your challenges. So if you have questions for a follow-up, please feel free to email me those questions. And I'd like you to try something from tonight, whether it's a change in a morning routine, a change in an evening routine, giving directions with the rule of 3, practicing stop, think, act. Try one of these interventions over the course of this week, and then we can talk about in the beginning of our class next week how it went. Because next week is our last class, I want to make sure that we have some follow-up on some of these home challenges, which can really be so dispiriting. I hope you have a great rest of your evening and a fun Halloween tomorrow. I'm happy to receive pictures of really adorable kids in their really adorable costumes. It's great being together tonight. Good night, and I'll see you next week. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.